Let's spend a little bit of time now thinking about next steps, how you can continue refining your skills as a speaker now at the end of this introductory 10-week course. In the rhetorical treatise Brutus, the famous orator Cicero argues that daily rhetorical exercises are needed to retain and strengthen eloquence. And in fact, he tells this cautionary tale of Hortensius, who lost his edge. Hortensius was this great grand speaker who lost his edge after abandoning his daily exercises. So, speech skills are not content that you can just file away in your mental file cabinet and pull out later when you need it. You should be thinking of them more as athletic skills, skills that need to continue to be refined if they're not going to atrophy. You can also think about this in terms of other sort of language skills or mental skills. So language skills would be an example. So when I was in college, in addition to majoring in communication, I majored in Russian. So I studied Russian language and Russian literature. I studied abroad in Russia. I went to school in St. Petersburg and Moscow. When I returned from Russia, I even had a few small jobs working as a translator. So I knew Russian. Then I went to graduate school and I stopped working in Russian. I stopped practicing my Russian and it atrophied. It's gone. It's at the point of non-use. Certainly, if I spent a couple of months to a year refining and practicing my Russian, I could get it back up to not a bad level, but it will never be to the level that it was 15 years ago. That's gone to me because I didn't continue to practice that skill. I didn't continue to think in that way and work on my Russian. So you don't want that to happen with your speaking skills. You want to make sure that you continue to sharpen these tools that you've developed over these 10 weeks and from other sources as well. So what are some ways to do this? Well, first off, find someone to work with. Find a practice partner. This can work particularly well if you're at an office and you have to give presentations and you just find somebody who you can show drafts to, bounce ideas off of. If they see your presentation, they give you feedback and vice versa. So finding people to work with and practice with is key. You need eyes outside of your own body. You need someone to watch and listen to your speeches and give you constructive feedback. You can also explore Toastmasters. So if you go to toastmasters.org, Toastmasters is a nonprofit entity, and it's really organized around providing opportunities for people to speak, providing audiences and some speech instruction. They've got clubs in all cities across the United States and in over 100 countries. So if you go to toastmasters.org and I think they've got a button for find a chapter, you can find a nearby chapter. Now, these are organized by chapter, and so you might want to shop around a little bit to make sure that you've got a chapter that works for you and allows you to develop the skills that you want to work on. I've had students who've had great success with Toastmasters chapters and others who had to shop around a lot more before they found one that really satisfied their needs. So those are some things. Other practices that you can be doing. Well, I've mentioned it a couple of times. Read poetry aloud, read famous speeches aloud. It's a great way of exposing yourself to models of imitation and being able to get into a text without having to worry about creating its content, right? You can just find emotion and tone and delivery and pitch and even work memory if you're working with established manuscripts. So find a speaker or find a poet that you particularly like and read their stuff aloud. Now, those are some things. We can also look back to history to find lots of really good exercises for refining your public speaking skills. So for hundreds of years, students of rhetoric refined their speaking abilities through what were called progymnosmata, preliminary exercises. These were exercises of increasing complexity. So kind of like how we move from impromptu to informative to persuasive in terms of increasing complexity, the progymnosmata did the same thing. And many of these are still very useful. So the progymnosmata sequence began with fables. So you would tell a well-known fable and either expand it to great lengths or reduce it down for brevity. And basically what you're doing is telling a story and ending it with some type of moral, a conclusion. And the idea of these, the pedagogical force driving something like fable or many of the progymnosmata, is to take content off the table to allow you to work on elaboration and delivery and other speech skills. And so here at the University of Washington, the introductory speech students do here is basically this initial progymnosmata. I'm not having them tell a fable, I have them tell a personal anecdote. So they tell a personal anecdote about themselves and they end it with a lesson. The idea being, since they know that content well, they don't have to worry about relearning its invention or arrangement, and they can focus on style and delivery. So you can do that, or certainly if you've ever told bedtime stories to a child, you're involved in practicing these fables. So take value in these opportunities. When my son was much younger, I made up a story about dragons, different colored dragons in different parts of a made-up world. It started out as a 5-minute story, and he kept wanting more and more iterations. What a great speaking opportunity for me. Of course, he wouldn't forget anything, so it ended at a 45-minute story that he wanted every night, and it was terrible. Sorry, Miles, if you ever watch this, that was horrible, having to remember. He had a huge memory. So he knew if I put the blue dragon not in the water but in the forest, that was wrong. He remembered it all. But nevertheless, you're telling stuff again and again and being able to play with the language and dynamic interchange of the ideas. So beyond fable, there was a kriya or a proverb, and many of these were similar to our model for the impromptu. And in fact, there's another way to practice impromptu that you might continue to use as a way of refining your speaking ability. Oh boy. So, what's this other model of impromptu? Well, in competitive speech, they don't do what we do, which is start with thesis statements more often than not. I started with thesis statements because what we were doing with argument and evidence, that was easiest, and I want you to be getting in that argumentative mindset. Now, another way of doing this, and actually very similar to the progymnasmata, is to start with quotations. So you get a quotation, you interpret that quotation, which becomes your thesis, and then you run basically the same impromptu, but maybe your examples are going to be literature or philosophy. So you could get a quotation like Victor Hugo's, "He who opens a school door closes a prison." Okay, well, what does this mean? It means education is an unprecedented, education is a force for good. Well, why is this? Well, Victor Hugo suggested that he who opens a school door closes a prison. And it is truly, education is a force for good. It both educates and liberates the mind, and it civilizes society. When we think of liberation, we need go no further than Plato's analogy of the cave, which illustrates how the study and pursuit of true knowledge can allow someone to escape the bindings of false belief. And you get the idea. So you just can take a quotation and work it up as an impromptu. It's maybe a little bit easier than coming up with thesis statements all the time. And the nice thing is, this not only gives you some good practice, it's a good way to warm up, but by using quotations, it allows you to explore good turns of phrase and work with those. So I mean, imagine if you did just one impromptu a week for a year. 52 impromptus, 5 minutes a pop. Think of the fluidity you would have at the end of that year. And that's a real low cost in terms of 5 minutes of time allocation for the results that you would see out of it. The idea is being able to run something again and again and becoming more and more comfortable with the very invention and idea of working in speech. So those are some ideas. I want to pause here, and in the next lecture we'll talk about some other practicing opportunities as you continue your path on becoming a good speaker.